Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wristwatch Revival. My name is Marshall. Thank you so much for coming along. This time on the bench, we have a Citizen Homer. And yes, this is the Citizen that you're thinking of. It's the Citizen from Japan, and it turns out that they've got quite a history behind them. This particular watch is in pretty rough shape. As you can see, the hands are kind of just floating around in the case. There's some parts in there, I think. It's going to need some work to get it back to running again, but it does come with the original bracelet on it, which is pretty cool. And I think there's something worth salvaging here for sure. This watch, again, that's not good. That looks like the end of the setting lever spring, perhaps. Really shouldn't be over here. But I did have it shipped over from Japan, and so it goes. Like I said, here's the original bracelet. Not too bad. These watches are interesting. Citizen is actually a company that has quite a history behind it. It goes back to 1918 is when the company was originally founded in Japan. In 1930, they took the name Citizen, and they've been going ever since. Nowadays, they're mostly known for quartz watches and such, a little bit on the lower end stuff, maybe something that you wouldn't find quite as interesting as a watch enthusiast or watch collector. But still, they've got that history behind them. It's always interesting to see what they have. And this watch is called the second setting. And the second setting actually refers to the fact, and by the way, it's real dirty. Yuck. The second setting refers to the fact that it actually has hacking. The movement hacks, which means when you pull the crown out to set the time, the second hand, in fact, the whole movement stops so that you can set it to the exact second. Now, you might be wondering why that would be relevant for a watch like this. And the reason is simple. This watch is actually a Japan Railway issued watch. You can see on the back here, that top number is Showa 44. That's 1969. That's the year. The middle is the serial number. And then at the bottom, it says Japan Railway. And then the best translation I could get on the other part is Office of Bills. I'm not sure exactly what that refers to, but these were actually issued to people who worked in the Japan Railway as their railway issued watches. So pretty cool. As you can see, this one, yikes. It was definitely used and it is in desperate need of a cleaning, which we will be giving it, thankfully. So no more of this gunk floating around. But overall, nice little watch, a kind of a classic design, right? No date on it, hacking movement. And let's take a look at what that movement looks like inside. All right, it's a 21 jewel movement. And of course, jewels are the bearings for a watch. You can see the beautiful deep red of those jewels sitting there. This is good. The balance moves. That's very important. Sometimes the balance is just broken and then, you have to do it. This also isn't great. The crown just simply comes right out. That could be a result of the fact that the setting lever spring is broken because it looks like part of it is in the front next to the dial. So yeah, we're going to have to dig in and take a look at it. But for now, let's work on getting the movement out of the case so we can actually have a look at it. Yeah, there it goes. It comes right out. Oh yeah, there's definitely extra parts that we will need to address. You can see the hour hand is still on. It looks like the minutes hand and the seconds hand have fallen off somehow. There's some loom in them, but they actually look like the loom's in pretty good shape. And yeah, it looks like actually the hour hand, the hour wheel, everything just comes off all at once, which, well, it doesn't normally work like that, but it probably isn't such a huge deal. So let's get this hour hand off of here so that we can actually see what we're looking at for the movement. Pretty standard issue brass dial here. Some of the paint's missing, but I don't think it's a deal breaker for it. Yeah, there's a gasket that goes on the back. So there's the hour wheel. That's just a screw to hold the case in. And yeah, taking a look at this, that is definitely, it goes right there on the setting lever spring and it is broken. So we're going to need to replace that. I can use my cannon pinion removal tool to take off the cannon pinion now. There it is. So we've already got some issues here. That's just a movement ring. But the movement looks relatively clean overall, meaning that there's no rust is really what I mean. because I don't think clean is actually how I would describe this, but rust-free I would say. So let's go ahead and take off the balance. I've never worked on a Citizen watch before. In fact, they don't really interest me until I found one of these, and I thought, wow, this is actually really cool. These are not expensive either. They go for a couple $100 on eBay. This one was cheaper because it was broken. But you can get ones that are in pretty good shape for, like I said, a few $100. Okay, we can take off the train wheel bridge now. And there it goes. Always like to just take a quick look at the components as I take them off. Sometimes I'll put them on the microscope to really look at them. And by the way, yes, this is a new camera angle that you see here. A new close-up third camera. I've been wanting to integrate this for a while, and thanks to the Patreon, I was able to do so. I hope you enjoy the new angle. Continue with the disassembly here. Citizen was, after they became Citizen, was actually quite influenced by Swiss watchmaking. There was a Swiss businessman that had a big influence on how they made the watches, and I can see it for sure. This is very similar to what you'd see from Switzerland from the era. But this is definitely on the higher end of the movements that they made. The 21 jewel movements, you know, I mentioned it before, those are the bearings. They don't make the watch more valuable inherently. Some people think that. They think in terms of jewels like diamonds or something, but it doesn't work like that. But there is actually a correlation to how many jewels a watch has to how valuable or how good the movement is, just because you can use jewels in any number of spots as a bearing, but you don't have to. Some places on a watch, it's less necessary, but if you choose to do so as the manufacturer of the watch, it does make it more resilient, it makes it last longer, and it potentially makes it run more efficiently as well. So when you see something like 21, you know, most standard issue movements have 17. And this one has 21. Okay, so we can continue taking this watch apart. We're looking now at the barrel bridge about to come off. A little bit of gunk around the barrel arbor there. So, well, we're going to want to clean that up, but hopefully there's no wear on the actual bridge itself or the main plate. And this is a little tricky to get this wheel out. And the reason for that is because sitting on top of it is actually the hack. So I just need to move it out of the way to get this wheel off of here. So I'm just going to use the little stick here just to gently push the hack out of the way. Again, the hack is a function. It's an extra bonus function that you can put on a wristwatch, and it allows you to set the watch to the exact second. And for normal day-to-day use, that isn't really necessary. Maybe it's a nice to have type feature, but you will see this feature pop up on military watches, and you will also see it pop up on watches like this that were designed to be made for the train system. Because, well, it should be obvious, you really want to have everybody synced up to the exact second. And, you know, being off for 45 seconds or a minute would be unacceptable in those environments. So that's why you see the hack function on this one. Now, I can't quite get the center wheel off without taking the pallet fork first. So I'm going to get that out of the way. And there comes out the center wheel. Now I can take off the hack. Pretty simple device for the hack. It actually just, that little arm that I just set down, it actually just presses up against the balance. Just any of the wheels or the balance, that's enough to stop the whole movement. As you know, it doesn't take much. You know, a hair or a piece of dirt can bring the whole thing to a grinding stop. So a metal bar like that pressing up against it is plenty enough. You know, there's a little tiny cover plate. Calling this a bridge might be a little bit aggressive. So a little cover plate here over the minute wheel. And this movement definitely could use a cleaning. All the oil's dry and even a little bit gunky on it, but I've seen a lot worse. You and I have seen a lot worse on this channel when it comes to dirt in the movement. So overall, not too bad. Now, this is the setting lever, and this is the part that has the broken end on it. So I'm going to have to find a replacement for this. And I think my plan is just to buy another one of these movements off of eBay and just steal it from it. And then maybe I could repair another watch or two of this type. I mean, this is a cool watch, so I shouldn't have a hard time getting rid of them if I do. There's the yoke and the yoke spring coming out. And I can't actually take the setting lever off. And that's because this is a type of setting lever that is actually held in place by like a tensioned bar or a spring, if you will. And I need to take that out simultaneously. And there, now it comes out. And that just leaves the barrel. This is where the main spring sits. This is where the spring that powers everything on the watch is. It's all right in there. Anything that your watch tells you, whether it's the time, the date, the moon phase, chronograph, if it makes sounds, alarm, any of it, it comes from a mainspring just like this. That's what gets wound up. That's where the power comes from the watch. That's the engine right there. Which is really one of the cool things about watches and watchmaking, is that all of the things that happen on a watch are from this wound up piece of metal. It's like kind of incredible. Okay, so there's the spring out, and it looks like it's actually in okay shape as well, although dirty. And that means that I can now put the balance back on as we prepare the watch for cleaning. And as I've mentioned before, you know, what we're going to be doing here is we're going to completely clean this watch in the watch cleaning machine, and then we'll reassemble it and lubricate it as we go and see if we can't get this thing running really nicely. It was listed as not running when I bought it. If I shook it a lot, I could get the balance to move a little bit, and it looked like it was engaging, but it just wouldn't go. And as you can see, that's how freely the balance runs, by the way. That's with no power on it. I blew air on it. That's it. Okay, so now everything goes into the watch cleaning machine. These are little tiny baskets that I got for the little parts, because as you might imagine, it's very easy to lose something that small. And then in the bigger basket go the bigger parts, like the parts of the bridge and the main plate and stuff like that. Okay, so we'll set that aside because we'll be putting that in the watch cleaning machine shortly. But before we do, let's take a look at the case. Clearly this crystal is going to need to be replaced. It looks like it got really banged up and it's just ugly and in bad shape. So that's a lost cause. But a little more interesting here is this case. And first things first, there's a lot of dirt in it. It's never been cleaned, and it's going to need to be thoroughly cleaned. So we will use the ultrasonic cleaner to do that. And what I like to do is take a piece of pegwood like this and maybe I don't like to do this, but I think it's better for the cleaning process if you can go through and kind of give it the once over before you put it in the ultrasonic cleaner. Now we can take a look at the dial real quick, and it looks like it's in pretty good shape. Yes, there is some paint missing on the edge, and there's some dirt, or maybe there's something going on there. But overall, it's actually in okay shape, and like the paint that's missing is right near the edge. So let's just give this a quick cleanup with a cotton swab and some water and see how it holds up. It's a nice looking dial, and if I can just get it just cleaned up a little bit, I think I would just go with it. Yeah, the paint missing's a little bit annoying, but it is on the edge of the watch where it's harder to see, and it doesn't affect the legibility or anything. Maybe it gives it a little bit of character. I don't know. Okay, gently dry off with some microfiber here just to make sure that there's no little bits of dirt. And hey, that actually cleaned up really nicely, super bright now. And I think I'm going to call that good to go. Now here is my donor movement. And as you can see, this one actually has the correct part, or I should say the complete part in it. It's got the setting lever spring. So we're just going to pop that out of this real quick. And then I'll have this donor movement that I can use for future repairs on this type of watch. You know, if somebody says, hey, I want one of those, and I can maybe pick one up off eBay for cheap, and then I'll have all these extra parts in case I'm missing something. For more expensive watches, it's not really feasible to buy a donor movement, but for cheaper ones where you can just find the movements bare, it's actually not. It's pretty reasonable to do so. Okay, so let's get to cleaning. We've got the bracelet and everything else going into the ultrasonic cleaner here, and then we'll reassess the bracelet and the case after it comes out. The ultrasonic uses a detergent. It's non-abrasive, and it uses heat, and then the ultrasonic waves. All those three things in concert to clean the watch case, in this case, and the bracelet. Okay, and now everything can go into the watch cleaning machine. Pretty simple process here for the watch cleaning machine. The basket gets mounted on the top. That's connected to an electric motor, and it goes through 3 processes plus a drying cycle. It's cleaning, rinsing, and then drying. And it's a pretty simple, straightforward operation. While I do clean this up, I did want to mention that I do have a Patreon that I mentioned earlier for this channel. It's helped get new equipment so that I can try to make the videos as good as they can be. And as you might imagine, these are quite intensive videos to make. And I do appreciate each and every person who helps me over there, particularly Trevor, Spencer, Ross, Robert, Ralph, Nate, NT, Mitchell, Michael, Mikey, Mara, Kevin, James, George, Erica, Dustin, Dominic, Brenton, Brian, Brett, Alex, and Brad. Thank you very much for your support. If you want to check it out, there's a link in the description. So here's the watch all cleaned up, the parts all laid out and everything like that. Now we got to address this bracelet situation though, because if you take a look, this isn't how it's supposed to look. And if you look really closely, you can see that the center links were polished and the outer links had like a graining on them before. And same thing with the clasp here. It looks like there was some type of graining originally. Now it's got a bunch of scratches and the graining's basically gone, but you can still see it a little bit at the right angle there. And you can really see it here on the end link, outer parts grained, inner parts polished. And I'm going to bring it back. We're going to bring this thing back to looking good again. And that means that we got to start doing some polishing. So the first thing that we need to do on the bracelet itself is polish away all of the scratches, right? We want to get this thing looking nice and clean again with good, smooth brilliance on it, basically. And then we can apply the graining back after. So basically we want to kind of reset this to fully polished, but we won't keep it that way because that wouldn't look right. And as you can see, it's just a matter of going over each of the things with my polisher here and trying to get it as cleaned up as I can. I'm using a medium to high-grade compound here, the higher cut they call it, so that should, take away a little bit more material, but nothing too aggressive. You never want to use it too much where if you overdo it, it ruins it. And as you can see, a lot to do. Okay, and now we can do the clasp. Similar deal here. Some of those scratches might be a little bit too deep to get off of there, but for the most part, I should be able to get this down pretty good. And then we can, again, reapply the graining after that. Okay, so here it is after having been polished up. And you can see already that it looks much, much better. Is it perfect? No, not really, but it looks okay. The clasp has some fairly deep scratches on it, but the bracelet itself actually polished up pretty well. But you'll also find that after you apply the graining, it can actually do a good job of covering up at least some of the smaller ones. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take some heat resistant tape and I'm going to cover up the middle links. Now remember, the middle links are the ones that we want to be polished still, meaning, you know, fully reflective, where the outer links are the ones that we're going to be putting the graining on. So I'm just going to use a knife here to cut away the extra tape. This is, of course, important that it's in the right spots and not in the wrong. Anything that has tape on it will not pick up the graining, but anything that doesn't will. So there we go. Now we've got the tape only covering up the middle section, and I can grab some Scotch-Brite here. And then it's a matter of, at least as uniformly as we can, pulling this across the Scotch-Brite over and over to apply the graining. And as you can see, it's a little bit of a finicky operation, kind of a two-handed deal here, but it works. And I'm just going to alternate where I put the pressure down so that it gets a nice even graining across all of the outer links. And as you can see, it's already starting to pick it up here. And take a look at that. How nice is that? You can see there's a nice graining on the outer links, but the inner links remain polished. And that's what we're going for here. Especially for an old bracelet like this too. You know, I think that doing a job to this level is appropriate. You could take time to hand polish the links or even to remove them completely if you wanted perfection. But on a watch like this, I feel that that's overkill. You want it to look good when you wear it. That's what you're going for. Now I can apply the same graining to the buckle. And there we go. See, and you can still see like maybe the tiniest hint of a couple of the scratches, but for the most part, they're gone. And you can see the difference between the bracelet when it's fully polished on the right and then with the graining on the left. It really does make a big difference. And of course, we need it to match. So once again, we'll grab our heat resistant tape and we'll do the other side. And it's the same process over here. And once again, we can remove the tape to see if it how it looks. And there we go. Looking good once again. Now we can't forget the end links. These are going to be a little bit trickier because they're very small. And here we go. And let's take off the tape and see how it turned out. Nice. That is exactly what we wanted to see. Okay, now let's turn our attention though to the case, because we have a decision to make. And I think after having redone the bracelet, we should go ahead and redo the case as well. It's not in bad shape, but it is going to need some work if we're going to get it to look kind of in the same way and about as good as the bracelet does. And I'm going to do this by hand. I don't mind using the machine on this, but I also find that, especially for these angles, it's a little easier to use these sticks because it allows me a little bit more control where I'm less at risk of rounding off one of the lug angles. And so I choose to use these sticks in many cases. I think it is harder. It does take longer, but I think it does a better job. And the general idea here is that you start out at a more abrasive sanding level and then work your way down to the less abrasive sanding levels as you go. Okay, let's see how it looks. It doesn't have any graining applied to it, so this is just a straight polish currently. So now what I've done here is I've applied tape to everything except for this topmost bezel, because as you can see, it's a little bit dinged up. Now there's only so much I'm going to be able to do to it. I don't think I'll be able to actually take out all of the dings because that does require removing material, and that bezel is also what holds the crystal in place, so I don't want to risk over sanding that away because it'll basically ruin the whole case. But as you can see, even with a couple of dings on there, it's much more reflective now after giving it the good polish treatment. And that's really what I was going for there. I don't think that I need to remove every single thing. A little bit of character on the watch is okay with me, but when I'm going to do a case, you know, I do want the finishes to be the right way. So now we can take off the tape. And now we can put some more tape back on because I want to apply some graining to the top part of the lugs. I want the sides to be shiny, but I want the top part to be grained, and that way it'll actually match up with how the bracelet goes. Because if you remember, the inner part of the bracelet and the end link is polished, but the outer part is brushed, and I'd like the lug to be brushed as well to kind of meet that other brushed finish. But that, of course, means that if I'm going to be applying brushing, I have to put tape on anything that I don't want to have that brushing, including the bezel and the sides. So this is a very careful prep operation here for what is ultimately a pretty simple thing, which is this. Just, again, I'm going to use a little bit finer of a Scotch-Brite here. But as long as the tape holds up, it'll only apply that graining to the surfaces without the tape. It's just, you need to take the time to make sure the tape is right. There we go. Okay, and there's our case. As you can see, there's a light graining on the top of the lugs. The inner bezel is nice and shiny, and then the outside is polished as well. And you can see that graining there on the top, but not on the sides where it's... Calling it a mirror finish may be a little much, but it's close to that. Okay, so now the case and the bracelet are done, and we can get back to putting the entire watch movement together and making sure that it runs, because that's, of course, the most important thing. So first things first, we're going to take some Mobius 8200 grease and just put a thin film of it over the entirety of the mainspring, and I use my finger cots there to do that. That just guards against corrosion. That's the main function of it. Now I'm going to take my mainspring winder and we'll wind up the mainspring into it after we put it on the post. The post that I'm putting it on actually acts in the exact same way that the barrel arbor does. And that's why you're able to wind it just like you would in a watch. And just in this case, it winds it into this little device that holds it in place and then lets you plunge it into the barrel rather than unwinding and powering the watch like it normally would. And there we go. Just get that last little end tab in there, and then we can unwind it a little bit so that it seats itself inside. Take off the winding attachment part itself. And then one of my favorite things about watchmaking is the feeling of putting this, but this is so nice. Listen. Oh yeah. That's the good stuff. I'm a big fan. There's lots of little things about watchmaking that are fun and or satisfying in some weird way, and that's one of them. Here's the barrel arbor going in. A little bit of Mobius 8200, or not 8200, HP 1300 here, just because the cap is going to go on top of that, like so. And then we can just snap it into place. Okay, so barrel arbor is assembled, and we can continue with the reassembly. First, we'll take off the balance. This has gone through the watch cleaning machine, as I said, so everything should be all spick and span. And I just want to take off this this balance just to be careful, right? If I set it down on the bench over here, there's nothing that really is going to happen to it. But if I leave it on, you know, you flip over the movement back and forth on the movement holder. You're putting stuff in and out, and it's just easier to have it out of the way. So we'll start with the center wheel that goes on the bottom, and then as you can see, there's this little bridge that holds it in place. Okay. Always just give it a quick check to make sure things are moving freely before moving on to the next step. It only takes half a second, and if it's jammed up, you'll know right away. There's a second wheel, just make sure that it's engaged. And I haven't actually put the barrel in yet, so we might as well do that right now. As you can see, it's kind of an interesting setup. It goes in between those two wheels in the center. Kind of sandwiches in there like that. There we go. And I'm just going to give it a quick touch to make sure that it's engaging. And yeah, there we go. Now these will spin more freely, of course, when they actually have the bridges on the top, but I just want to make sure that the teeth are engaging. And now I can kind of sneak the escape wheel in here. Maybe I should have put that in first. I'm not sure. And I just gotta, there we go, get it kind of seated in there. And before we go putting on any of the big bridges or anything, I want to make sure that I put the hack in. And as far as I can tell, this slider for the hack just slides right metal to metal on the seat that it's in. So I'm going to put some grease in there just because I feel like, I don't know, that's probably a fairly high friction area. And then I can put the hack itself in. There's really something therapeutic about taking apart watches and putting them back together. I hope you get something out of it too, watching. I don't know how much it translates to watching versus doing, but it really does feel good to, you know, go through the process of putting something like this back together piece by piece. I don't know why. Okay, so now we've got the barrel bridge in place, and that means that we can go ahead and go for the train wheel bridge. And this one's always a little bit tricky because, as you can see, there are 3 pivots that all need to be lined up with those jewel holes on the top. And not quite in there yet. Gently putting pressure on the top, and then I'm kind of manipulating the barrel because that can actually, there we go, make the pivots move around a little bit, and then they'll find the jewel that they need to be seated in. It's delicate though, because you don't want to push down too hard while you're doing that, you know, so it's like this kind of push and pull thing. But you get a feel for it after a while. And I'm keeping that pegwood on top while I tack down those screws to make sure that this happens, that things move freely. Very, very important, of course. Okay. Now we can put the crown wheel in. These are, of course, left-hand threaded. You notice there that I was turning it backwards how you would normally turn a screw, so very strange. Now I'm going to lubricate where the barrel meets the barrel bridge there. A little bit of HP 1300, although I got a little too much in there, so I have to remove some. I've been trying to work on that. You want to use, you know, generally less rather than more, but it can be tricky. Okay, here's a click spring going into place. That's going to sit underneath the ratchet wheel. And then the click can go into place. Like so. Okay, just a quick check to make sure everything's seated in there. And that means we can put on the ratchet wheel. This one's kind of cool. It says Japan on the top. And again, this is also a left-hand threaded screw. You can see because there's 3 lines on the top, that's an indication that this is a left-hand threaded screw, so you turn it the opposite way that you normally think. Okay, I'm just making sure that those teeth are engaged properly, and it looks like they are. So now we can flip the movement over, put a little bit of lubricant there, and then put the cannon pinion back on, just like that. And start looking at both the motion and the keyless works, which happen on what we call the dial side. So this is the other side of the watch where the dial sits on top of. And this is where the winding mechanism and the hand setting, and also just the hand, the gears that actually run the hands themselves sit. Really curious to see if this thing's going to run, and if so, how well. You know, this was Citizen taking a shot. I mean, they were really saying like, hey, we're going to put out like a high grade movement here. And, you know, when you put some extra jewels in there and stuff, you're saying we're going for accuracy. Okay, there's an intermediate wheel. And I can't quite get the, there we go, for the minute wheel. And now the winding stem. And the crown. This blue stuff I'm putting on there is a grease. It's a high friction grease for watches. Kind of the heavy duty machinery of a watch happens here at the keyless works. And now I need to kind of get this spring attached to the setting lever before I put it on. It's a little bit of a finicky operation, but there we go. And again, this is for the setting levers. If you've ever had to take the crown out of a watch, some of them have a screw that you unscrew and it comes out, and some of them have a little, almost like a button that you push down with tweezers or a screwdriver. And the button ones are spring. They're held under tension, and that's what this one is. The screw ones are just held in by a screw, as you might imagine. Okay, so that looks like it's working. That means that we can go ahead and put on the yoke and the yoke spring. There's the yoke spring. It's quite a big spring. And I've taken to using a piece of pegwood or a plastic stick to kind of hold the spring in place while I gently, ever so gently, get the other part of the spring seated correctly, like so. Okay, so that's done. And this is now the replacement setting lever spring. This is the one that was broken. In fact, had a part of it just literally floating around in the case. Man, I just need to get this kind of seated down because, as you can see, it's not actually engaged with the setting lever yet. And that's why you see it kind of floating here. So what I'm going to do is just pull this over. There we go. And now I can actually screw it all the way down. Perfect. And just a quick check before we do anything to make sure that it wants to engage properly. And there we go. So that's to set the time. And then I can even put the minute wheel here that engages, and there we go. So that looks like that's working properly. And then if I push it in like this, that's how you wind the watch. And after lubricating that up, I can put this little cover plate back on. Like so. And now we can flip the watch back over and put the pallet forks in. And, you know, this is, of course, means that we're just a couple of steps away from seeing if this watch is going to run. Pallet fork goes in first, and then the pallet fork bridge. It's always a little bit tricky because you need the top pivot on the pallet fork to kind of line up and get into the jewel hole, but it's a little tricky to see if that's actually happened or not. And so I try to keep a little bit of pressure on here and then kind of maneuver this until it feels like that, like it's actually seated. And then I'll take the screw and actually tack down the bridge here. And then what I can do is move the pallet fork back and forth here to make sure that it's seated correctly, and then finally tighten it down all the way. Now I'm going to put some wind in the watch. So this is going to send power from the mainspring down through the train of wheels to here, and we should see this, yes, doing exactly that, clicking back and forth. That's what we want to see. So let's put the balance in and let's see if this thing will run for us. This is easily the most exciting part of doing watchmaking. It really doesn't get old at any point. Okay, there's definitely some tension here, but it doesn't kick right up, at least not right away. Sometimes I find that if I put the screw just loosely onto the bridge here, it kind of aligns things a little bit better. You don't want to tighten it down or anything, but just sort of getting it there can help it get aligned properly so that it can start running. And yeah, not quite. It definitely was starting to. So I'm going to tighten down the screw a little bit more here and see if we can't get this thing going. No, I guess it doesn't want to run. Oh, no, I spoke too soon. It does want to run. And there it is. It is off and running. Now, it doesn't seem to have very much in the way of amplitude, but there now it's starting to kick up a little bit. You do need to wind up the watch all the way. One thing that people often don't understand is that watches actually run, you know, better usually with a full wind. There's a certain portion of the wind that actually runs them the best. And now you can see it's actually ticking along quite nicely here. Beautiful. Love to see that. Really one of my favorite things to see in the world is a watch running again like this, because it means that we are down the stretch. And so now, of course, the next stage is to take off the jewels and lubricate those. That will also help the watch run a little bit better. And this is a weird jewel setup with this kind of crazy springed jewel top thing in it. I've never actually seen one of these, so I just cleaned it up and I'm just going to put it back in. Isn't that a weird setup? That's the shock protection setup so that it can move side to side and then that metal kind of bends with it. And then this is the upper cap jewel now that it's been cleaned and oiled. And it's a little bit weird. I've not done one of these before. This is not the design that I'm used to. And as you can see, the oil is actually underneath. So I'm trying to be as careful as possible not to displace it, because if it gets displaced, you have to start over again. Not with the whole thing, but just with this top part. Okay, there we go. Now, if you're wondering where some of those other jewels are coming from of the 21, this is where. So this is the top part of one of the jewels. And as you can see, instead of just having a jewel with a hole in it, it actually has a cap. So this is a little spring that holds the cap in place. And then if I take some Rodico, boop, you could barely see it, but I remove the cap. And now I can oil it, put a little drop of oil in the middle after cleaning it, and then put it back into place here. And this is what it looks like when you do it wrong. So I dropped it too soon. And as you can see, the oil has now ran to the edge, and it is no longer in the middle where it's supposed to be. In fact, the only place it's not is in the middle. So that means I have to do this over again. So I'm going to remove it. I'm going to even use the Rodico to try to clean up any residual oil on here. I'm going to re-clean it, put the oil back on, and let's see if we can get a better shot. There we go. Now see how the oil's in the middle? That's actually what we want to see here rather than how it was before. So yeah, sometimes you just have to do it a couple of times. And now we can replace this spring thing and throw it on the time grapher, and let's see how it does. Hey, this is pretty good. Whoa, that's really good. Between -1 seconds and 0 seconds is great. The beat error is a little bit off. 0.8 milliseconds isn't where you want to be, but it's got decent amplitude and it's keeping within 1 second or 0 seconds a day. That is really great. I can see why they chose to use these for the railways now. Incredible. So now we can finish putting the case and everything together and then get the watch cased up. So the first thing that we want to do is replace that crystal. That thing was completely done for. So I'm going to use my rober press to do that. Very simple operation once you get used to it. It just squeezes down the crystal edges. Then you can pull the case up to it and then undo it, and the crystal expands into the bezel. It's really simple. So you can get rid of the rober press, and let's take a look at how this thing came out. Oh, perfect. Gorgeous. There's really something about it, you know, with the case being polished and the bracelet and the new crystal. I think we're really going to breathe some new life into this watch. Now we can put the hour wheel on and get the dial going. You can see it's happily running away still. This is the movement ring. It's a spacer. Basically, it lets it fit into the case because the movement's not big enough to be in there by itself. Now we can put the hands back on. Hour hand and the minute hand. The loom looks fine on this. I kind of like how it's aged a little bit, so I'm not going to be relooming or doing anything to these hands. Okay, that looks good. The hands aren't touching each other. They're not scraping on anything or out of alignment. And that means we can put the seconds hand on. Okay, so it's running. And look, when I pull out the crown, the seconds hand stops, which is exactly what should happen. And just making sure that things are lined up here. Yep, that looks good. And then when I push it back down, it starts again. So that is exactly what we want to see. Now we just need to quickly remove the crown so that we can case the watch and see how it looks in its new home. Or at least refurbished home. Okay, on goes the case, and then we just flip the whole thing over so that we can put the winding stem back in and the crown. And as you can see, the watch is still running quite nicely. Very nice, very nice. Looking good. Now, I want to replace this this gasket. This is the one that came with it. I have no idea how old it is. So I'm just going to use a brand new gasket here. This is a silicone that you can, it cleans it and then it puts just a light layer of it on just for better sealing properties. So we'll just get this gasket into place. Brand new fresh gasket for our railway watch. And then I'm actually going to use the rober press once again because this is a press-on case back. And I was going to press it on with my hand because normally it'll just click on, but it kind of was being a little bit stubborn. So I decided to do it the right way. And I'm going to use my rober press for this. So this time, instead of using the press to put in a crystal, we're going to use it to press on a case back. You see that plastic bag I'm using underneath? That's just to prevent any incidental scratches or any dings or anything like that. But I've got a larger die on the bottom and then a smaller one that fits the case back exactly. And then I can just give it a nice gentle push. And this is what I like about the Rober press, is that since it has the wheel on the top, you can really kind of choose how much pressure you want to put on it rather than having to push down on it with a traditional press. So you can do it incrementally. And there we go. Take a quick look. Yep, looks like it's all sealed up and on there beautifully. And that means that this thing's a done deal. So there's the watch itself. It looks great. And like I said, you know, yeah, the dial has some paint missing. It's a thing. But overall, the watch is really handsome. No date, super legible, nice movement, and it even has a hacking movement in it, which is just cool, with some neat history, right? And let's get the bracelet on too and see how it looks. I think this thing came out great. Get the end link with the new spring bar. I always use new spring bars whenever I work on any watches. They're really cheap, and it's like cheap insurance against them falling off. And you can see the bracelet matches up nicely and looks really good. Polished center links, brushed outer links. The case has now been given a nice refresh. The dial cleaned up, the movement running beautifully. And we're all finished. There it is. The Citizen Homer second setting from Japan. I am really happy with how this watch came out. If you like simple design, that kind of stuff, right? If you like a nice clean look to your watch, super legible in a vintage watch, I can't recommend this one highly enough. It is fantastic. A really cool watch, and definitely something that you should consider if you're looking to get into vintage watches, because the price is accessible, well, especially compared to some of the stuff you see these days. That's going to do it for this video. First, I wanted to thank you for hanging out with me and going on yet another horological journey. I really appreciate you coming along and sharing this great hobby with me. If you want to follow me on Instagram, you can get in between video updates, like while I'm working on projects. Sometimes I'll post pictures. I'll even post pictures of my own watches for my collection and stuff like that. It's wristwatch_revival over on Instagram. And I hope to see you over there. Thanks again for hanging out with me. We'll see you next time.